Hello everyone, my name is Rabia Mahfooz and I am from Islamabad, Pakistan. I am the co-founder of Women for Peace Tech, and today's topic of discussion is reclaiming urban and rural spaces for women of Pakistan. At Women for Peace Tech, we provide digital trainings in order to reclaim urban and rural spaces for women for their economic empowerment and also to empower women through technology for positive peace. So the idea of Women for Peace Tech was conceived back in 2018 while my colleague, who is also the co-founder of Women for Peace Tech, was working on the Built Peace project as a Built Peace Fellow in the rural areas of Pakistan, where she was mapping water disputes using the GIS system. And she was also piloting that project. And during that piloting project, because it involved peace processes, she came across women who were receptive towards getting the digital trainings. So she came to me and we discussed about it because I have my expertise in the digital media and she has her expertise in the peacemaking and policy making. So we combined our efforts and we started this organization for good. So right now Pakistan stands on the 151th number on the Global Gender Gap Index in the areas of health, education, economic opportunities and political empowerment. And unfortunately, Pakistan is also among those countries where 93% of population, especially women, face some form of sexual violence in the public places during their lifetimes. And this causes women with restricted rights to mobility due to the structure of the society, and so their right to work is affected because of this restriction on mobility. And this is a very big problem because this keeps the women out of the workforce. And in Pakistan, women are more than 50% of the population. So that means that practically 50% of the population of Pakistan is facing difficulties to work. They are restricted in finding the economic opportunities. They are not able to claim any significant places in both urban and rural spaces. So eventually the right to work gets restricted because the restricted rights to mobility. So when we started Women for Peace Tech, our idea was to basically provide these women with the platform from which they can work from their homes and make use of the digital space, which is a safe space to combat these issues. And the social media and the digitalized age has given them one opportunity where they can work from their homes, from the sanctity of their homes, in turn getting economically empowered and making their own decisions to improve their lives. So my personal expertise revolves around digital media, and I work as a social media strategist, and I look at this part of the trainings. I provide in-person trainings on social media and freelancing, as on how women can use different freelancing platforms to earn a stable livelihood from the ease of their homes. There are different freelancing platforms such as Fiverr, Upwork, People Per Hour, and so on. And these women can create their profiles on such platforms and build their portfolios. And after a time span of few months, they can start earning as per their expertise. So before COVID-19, although Pakistani women had restricted rights to mobility, but we were still working in the field, and we were training these women on how to use digital spaces for their economic empowerment. But as COVID-19 came, the dilemma of the restriction of mobility for women increased. They could not get out of their homes because there was a strict lockdown between March and September. And so it was become more important that women has access to some online help in case of domestic violence, since you know that domestic violence cases are also increased all over the world during this lockdown. In Pakistan, 25% increase in the domestic violence cases were reported, with 3,217 cases between March and May alone. So after the increase in the domestic violence cases, it was become more important to provide protection to these women. So apart from the work in the digital trainings, we also started working against domestic violence by providing the necessary help that these women needed. And we provided consultations to women, and we collaborated with the relevant ministries. So I myself is an independent working woman, and along with so many other women that I have trained so far, and they were working independently on different freelancing platforms, and I'm glad that they were working. Otherwise, it could have been a mess, because I know a lot of people who lost their jobs to COVID, and there were single working mothers who were supporting their families, and they lost their jobs because of the financial loss that the companies faced all around the world. Um, in the past 2 years, we have already approached approximately 1,000 households where we trained the women, but due to this pandemic, there were accessibility issues. So, in such times, we really needed a platform that could be used to help and support such women. So I, along with my colleagues, started working on an internal communication server which could be used to provide special online trainings to these women, and also to provide these women with a platform to update us on any concerns and issues related to domestic violence. We also use this platform to link the women concerns related to domestic violence to the concerned authorities, so that a legal action could be taken. And to make sure that things worked fine, we collaborated with the Ministry of Women Development in Pakistan. So you must be wondering that why we initiated it. We initiated it because we had access to such authorities, although it wasn't a smooth ride, smooth path for us, because we did face some difficulties and obstacles. Initially, there were connectivity and communication issues because the server for training and reporting was new. So we have a developer on standby who was working 24/7 and making sure to maintain this website up and running for all the women out there. So gladly, after a month of ups and downs, we were able to resolve the issue, and with the help of the IT team, of course. And the women whom we have trained before helped us in communicating and bringing more women to this platform. Additionally, we also had this well-being checklist, which where the registered women were to update us at least once a week, so that we know that they are doing fine during this whole domestic violence and lockdown situation, and that social justice was being served in such scenarios. Also, women, on the behalf of many women, we communicated the domestic violence issues on the Pakistan Citizen portal to the concerned authorities. And side by side, we also conducted trainings on how to use this Pakistan Citizen portal, which allowed women to to register their complaints on their own without depending on anyone else. Because there were many women who didn't know about this portal, and they didn't know how to use this portal. So those specific trainings helped them with this. And unfortunately, COVID-19 has impacted everything and everyone all around the world, and women are being affected more than ever. And to help such women, we really needed something to support them, to keep them stable during these tough times. So we came up with this platform, the internal communication server, and helped a lot of women during the course of these months. And we continue to do so, because the COVID is still here and it's not gone. Although the restrictions and the lockdown is being lifted in Pakistan, but we have already entered the second wave of it. And our plan is to extend our service. Our plan is to extend our services in the domains of domestic violence and sexual violence as well, because this is something that cannot be eliminated or ended in a given time period. So this is our plan for the upcoming months and years, and this is what we aim to achieve. Lastly, there are many other concerns when it comes to reclaiming urban and rural spaces, but since our expertise involves digital media, so we thought of empowering women through it and giving them the necessary trainings so that they can work independently. So that's all for now. If you have any questions or concerns related to our work or our organization, then feel free to reach out to us on the given details. Thank you.
10 years ago, Mohamed El-Bouazizi, a young Tunisian street vendor, set himself on fire to protest against the authorities who confiscated his goods. He lost his life. A few times later, protests erupted in the whole country, then in several Arab countries, and Morocco was no exception. Morocco, my country, was no exception. Demonstrations across the country erupted, and a lot of them were organized by street vendors. Usually, authorities would manage street vending either by organizing evacuation operations or by relocating street vendors in remote markets. But at the time, the tensions were so high that the authorities backed off to avoid any confrontations that might lead to deadly results. At the time, I was a third-year architecture student. I was observing the situation. Debate about street vending returned to TV and media, and I was surprised that it is discussed from an economic, social, political point of view exclusively, but quite never from a spatial and urban point of view. So, as an aspiring architect, I decided to explore this aspect for my final year project. And to me, it was my way to contribute to change. That was all I could do. And that's when I became aware of the scarcity of data and research about informal economy and how little we know about street vending in urban planning in the Moroccan context. So I decided to take my research further and work on the same subject, but for a PhD this time, and discovered that I had many misconceptions about this activity and have shifted from trying to find a solution in this considering street vending as a problem to trying to understand the functioning system of the activity. At this point, my journey to understand has begun, and today I'd like to share 3 ideas that are simple but that have completely changed my mindset. So here's what I've learned. First, street vendors and authorities fight for the same thing, but from different angles. I conducted a quick survey among street vendors and authority agents and asked simple questions like, what do you blame the other side for? What does street vending represent for you? The answers were not striking per se, but when classifying the terms used by each side, it occurred to me that the 2 sides think of the conflict from different angles. Here's what I got. Street vendors talk about their right to the city, right to have a decent life. Street vending as an income resource, their way to have a decent life after government let them down jobless. On the other side, authority agents would say that street vendors operate streets. It's a source of noise and dirt and disorder. So notice with me that street vendors talk about the socio-economic aspect of their activity and defend the concept of street vending as a source of income and dignity, while authorities are all about space use and functionality and do not deny the right to a decent life. The point, street vendors and authorities are in a perpetual conflictual situation without ever listening to each other. Understanding that both are not enemies but can actually work together can be a real game changer in the way the conflict is managed. Second idea, or interesting one too. Street vending belongs to the Moroccan city, both from a cultural and spatial point of view. Here's an example. This is the capital city of Rabat, and this is the map of the old city that now represents the heart of the downtown area. It's surrounded by ramparts. This is like the typical urban form of Islamic and some Mediterranean cities. The red represents the commercial strips that are still functional to now. And here you can see the spaces where open-air markets used to be held weekly centuries ago. I was curious to know what happened to those markets because they do not exist in that form. And here's what I found. In 1912, Morocco entered the French Protectorate, which considered those markets as tantamount to dirt and disorder and altered the prestigious image of the city they were creating for Rabat. Progressively, they introduced alien urban models and built modern covered markets that ended kicking off the markets from their initial soils. After independence, same policies were adopted and those markets have been overlooked and haven't been recuperated. Progressively, now street vending returned around the same areas, surprisingly, which is to me like street vendors are regaining a terrain, a soil that was designed for them initially. The point, understanding and recognizing that street vending belongs to the Moroccan city shows why evacuation operations are vain. Conflict is actually built on a wrong assumption that street vending is an intruder activity due to rural exodus, globalization, and so on. Third idea, street vending. There's an order behind the apparent disorder. Here's another example of another city that's called Sala, where 90% of commerce is estimated to be informal. This is an animated neighborhood of the city that is notorious for its street vending activities. 4th Street, those you can see on the 3D model, are full of street vendors, plus 2 vacant land lots. It turned out that each vending area has its specific merchandise and vending hours and rules, of course, officiously. Also, after months of observation, it turned out that the movement of street vendors from one point to another was not aleatory, but actually there was like a virtual table that every street vendor knew. That was the site for my final year project to get architecture diploma, and understanding this fact that it is intrinsic to that site helped me better orientate my design proposal. The point here is that relocation projects should not be systematic. Rather, a deep diagnosis can show details and specific order behind the apparent disorder and would help authorities and urban planners to suggest adapted designs that respect the original order created by street vendors. So, 10 years after the Arab Spring, the conflict is still the same. Management policy is still the same, and it seems like no lessons were actually learned from that exceptional time. In my PhD journey, choosing to understand the logics behind street vending methods, locations, and movements rather than systematically thinking of it as a problem to be eradicated have completely changed the way I do and will approach this matter as a researcher in urban informality. Breaking down the motives of the conflict from each side made me believe that peace is possible with understanding and recognition. To keep hope, let's end it with a tangible example that proves it's possible. COVID-19 has brought the debate to the table again. As gatherings are prohibited, many street vendors have found themselves resourceless. However, others, especially food vendors, were clever and resilient enough to adapt as people could not go to markets anymore. Those vendors would drive through neighborhoods and stop for a while to allow residents to get what they need. This way, street vendors could still have income, and inhabitants could still get food while social distancing, and authorities allowed it to happen. The street vendors understood that they should avoid gatherings and adapted their service. The authorities from the other side recognized that vendors were actually part of the solution in this case. So when street vendors and authorities tried to understand each other, we had a moment of peace. This actually worked. I am Wafae Bouallala, architect and PhD student in urban planning. Thank you for your attention.
Good day. I'm Diana Ocholla, and I'm based in beautiful Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you for joining this session. I really look forward to sharing my research focus with you. I am a student at the UCT Graduate School of Business. I'm doing the Master's in Philosophy degree specializing in inclusive innovation. And I found that I was doing this degree in a very unique time, in a pandemic. And I wanted to change my topic to reflect what I was feeling and what I was thinking in this very bizarre time. And that was that the human aspect I felt was and is really missing from the conversations, from the narrative. We are so bombarded by the numbers, how many people are passing away, how many cases there are. But what about their stories? How do we acknowledge people that have passed away, that are still here, that are adapting, that are innovating? How can we celebrate some of the new ways people have found to engage across society and across the world? And what that drew me to are these three areas: commemoration, the arts, and community mobilization. What lies at that intersection is what I'm curious to explore. And thinking of it from an urban space perspective, I remember the first day of lockdown, waking up in my apartment with my pet rabbits and hearing nothing. The city was completely quiet, and that scared me quite a bit. And as the days progressed, as the weeks, months progressed, hearing the city come alive more and more, but also within my four walls, connecting deeper with family and friends, hearing and learning about people innovating in new ways. And this made me very excited and curious to think about how can we focus this a little bit more. What could a project that aims to try and connect these three dots potentially look like? And this made me start sort of weighing up some of the positives and some of the negatives that have resulted from this pandemic and how it's impacted people in various ways. We're aware of the mental health issues that are developing and that probably will continue to develop, the lockdown, desensitization, and loss. But on the other side of the spectrum, there's the innovation that's grown, there's the support, there's the renewed appreciation of the small things. And this is really exciting. This right hand of the scale is really, really exciting. And so now that's drawn me to my work, where I'm posing the research question: what are the outcomes when communities remotely mobilize to commemorate their experiences during a pandemic using art-based methods? This can feel a bit like a mouthful, but it is commemoration, community mobilization, and the arts. And I shall be undertaking a case study comparison. I shall focus on the one area and then touch onto the other area. So the Ezekiel Museum is a very prominent museum here in South Africa. And for the first time, they're going to reach out to what they call our community curators, where they are going to put a call out to the public to submit stories, photographs, videos of their experiences and time during the pandemic. And the theme of this exhibition will be social solidarity in the time of COVID-19. This is already an interesting example of how an organization is calling upon the general public to contribute towards an initiative that encapsulates people's time during this pandemic. I'll observe the planning and the organization and the eventual implementation of this idea. I shall attend the online exhibition, and through focus groups, interviews, and note-taking, I hope to draw upon some kind of narrative of new insights. How did this organization interact with people? How did the people experience this organization? What feelings came up? What learnings came up that we can draw upon and potentially adapt for other environments? On the other side of the scale is a bit different. The other case study, Woodstock Woodstock is the neighborhood I live in, and a CAN is a community action network. And these networks have popped up all around South Africa, where communities have mobilized to basically support people in their neighborhood and beyond, whether it's through soup kitchens, sewing masks, delivering food to the elderly. People have been activated across the country to initiate these organizations and run them. And this has been hugely beneficial to the government as well, because while the government is trying to do what they can from one end, these community action networks are supporting from the other side and making sure that people are staying fed, that people are feeling supported and held. And now it does serve an interesting predicament that with the worst of the pandemic sort of passing, these CANs are now trying to figure out how do they continue to support their communities. So with Woodstock CAN specifically, of which I'm a member, I shall engage in participatory research to co-create a project. What this project looks like right now, I don't know. But the idea is that we will collaborate and create some kind of project that commemorates how Woodstock CAN members felt and experienced this pandemic. And the same that I'll do with Ezekiel Museum, I shall also conduct focus groups, interviews, and note-taking to track the process of this co-created project, as well as the implementation and the key learnings. And it will be very interesting, I feel, to eventually compare the two case studies and see what similarities and differences exist. One of the many reasons why I'm really, really passionate about this is commemoration as a word is really powerful, because it doesn't just refer to honoring the dead. It refers to honoring the living, honoring their sacrifices, their resilience. And I think what South Africa has shown is that with our humor, we're able to band together and find lightness even in the darkest places. So some silly examples include the Zol song, which was made or remixed from a minister's speech. It's seeing a video of an orchestra at a liquor shop when the alcohol ban was lifted, and this orchestra celebrating the opening of the liquor shop. Or it's our president addressing the nation and asking the nation to take part in the Jerusalem dance challenge, which many people took very seriously. And these small examples, they involve the arts. It involves a way of people getting together and connecting that you maybe wouldn't have connected before. But what I'm really curious to explore is what would it look like if we commemorate in real time? Because also commemoration is normally done retrospectively, whereas we're in this pandemic right now. How can we honor our experiences, our time, our sacrifices, our loss? And when you think about the mental health devastation that so many people are experiencing and may continue to experience, I really believe that such a project would benefit or would add value to emotional and social functioning. And it is at a space right now where there are so many unknowns. But through engaging with the Ezekiel Museum and Woodstock CAN and seeing where these different initiatives and projects lead, I hope that I'll be able to share some of these results and findings and ways of engaging with people remotely that could potentially benefit or be of interest to people around the world or in various industries. Thank you for your time, and I really look forward to engaging with you now and hearing some of your thoughts and ideas, suggestions, questions please feel free to ask away. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Lenihan. I am the founder and CEO of Public Sentiment, and I'm delighted to be speaking with you all at Build Peace 2020. On the morning of March 13th, as COVID was gripping New York City and the world, our phone rang, and it was a colleague of mine calling from New York City's Economic Development Corporation to say that they were facing an insurmountable challenge. They had resources, as did the rest of city government, but they didn't know how to use them best to effectively respond to the crises and help local communities facing diverse challenges across the city. We know that as peace builders, when there is a knowledge gap between governments and communities at the local level, that it poses some really hard challenges. And Public Sentiment was created to address exactly these kinds of knowledge gaps so that local communities and governments are better in dialogue with one another to create good, effective solutions. We're using smart data, policy design, and community engagement as tools to help local governments create more social, financial, and health equity for people across New York City and in communities around the world. When COVID struck New York, the challenges that New York City's government faced were not unique, but they were serious, and it was putting lives at risk. And so what we wanted to do was apply Public Sentiment's model of community engagement to do a couple things that we as peace builders know are really critical for responding in the face of crisis. One of them is to build greater trust, and the other is to create greater understanding. We believed that these two pillars of peace building could be adapted to help New York City create more effective responses in the face of emergency to COVID-19. And I want to share with you some of the lessons we've learned from this experience as we've come to understand it, and to note the importance of what effective community engagement can do as it relates to really any challenge that may be at hand in any context around the world. And at any time. Right now, I think we are all very familiar with how governments tend to respond when there are crises like COVID. You have governments and businesses with a lot of resources, and you have issue experts with a lot of important information that tell people what to do and what's going to happen. There's usually very little insight from the communities up to governments. And it seems that oftentimes solutions are one-size-fits-all. And we all really know that one-size-fits-all solutions never really works at local levels. So what we wanted to do was to, in the face of COVID-19, one of the greatest public health crises in modern times, was to use our place-based approach to community engagement to help local governments create and respond to solutions to the challenges that we're facing New Yorkers. So our model really focuses on building trust and understanding by making governments, businesses, and residents the sources and recipients of knowledge and ideas. Shortly after COVID-19 hit New York City in March, we launched a project in Brownsville, Brooklyn, called the Brownsville Sentiment Equity Project. Brownsville is one of New York City's hardest hit communities. It had a hospitalization rate for COVID-19 patients 2.5 times that the rest of New York City's average. And importantly, it is predominantly a community of color, with 70% of residents who are Black and 20% who identify as Latinx. It's also important to note that nearly 40% of the community lives below the poverty line, so it's safe to say that access to reliable and good quality of care is a challenge for this community, and it's not unique to Brownsville. This is something that is seen in many communities around the city. However, there is a silver lining here in the effects that there is very high smartphone penetration. So in the face of a pandemic, there was still community channels of communication that could be accessed, and you saw immediate responses from local organizations in Brownsville using those channels as ways to mobilize and organize more effective responses to immediate needs, especially for the most vulnerable populations and underserved. Those who are identified exactly as those that New York City and the folks at the EDC were saying, we're not quite sure how best to use our resources to help them. So with the Brownsville Sentiment Equity Project, we are bringing everybody to the table. As any good peace builder knows, a crisis oftentimes is a good opportunity to raise funds. So we took advantage of emergency relief funding with Robin Hood Foundation and private sector partners as well, with HP and Con Ed, to build a coalition led by 5 local community leaders, other community activists, and 70 local partner organizations, and our team of psychologists, neuroscientists, software engineers, and policy experts to build the social infrastructure and digital tools, which the Build Peace community loves so much, importantly, to respond effectively to the COVID-19 crisis. With Brownsville Sentiment Equity Project, we've done this in 3 ways. One, we've built a digital dashboard where people can take monthly surveys to indicate what things are causing them greatest stress and to track how they are coping with these stress over time. And to benchmark this against other citywide data so we can see what is going on at a local level versus other communities. Second, we're offering real-time personalized resources and information to help residents with immediate needs expressed through their surveys. And third, offering opportunities for participants to join working groups alongside policymakers so that they can co-design solutions and programs to address the needs that are identified and elevated within these monthly surveys. Now, like any project, this is an exercise built on trust and understanding, and community engagement in the face of a crisis, a public health crisis, when we're quarantining, is especially challenging. But importantly, 3 months after the initiative launched, New York and the United States found themselves in the face of another urgent crisis, which was the mass demonstrations and protests around the killing of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police in Minnesota. These protests in the United States lasted months, and they were especially pronounced in New York City. We were the epicenter of another activity, this time around racial and social justice. And Brownsville was especially involved. There were confrontations with police, and there was obviously violent outbreaks, both coming from the police actually as well, which really created some major issues with trust or exacerbated trust with local police departments and the Brownsville community. So overnight, what we saw our Brownsville Sentiment Equity Project focused on COVID-19 become was a project much more about the equitable response to COVID-19 to now looking at social justice issues writ large. And some of the lessons that we learned were important to share, and I want to talk about 3 specifically with you all today. The first is that pre-existing relationships in peace-building efforts are so important. First of all, in any relationship, you need time for this mutual trust to build. And in the face of COVID-19, people were willing to work with one another more openly. Had our project started in the midst of the racial protests, it would have been much harder to address and work with the community to adapt to the pressing issues that they wanted to address at the local level. So having those pre-existing relationships already in place was really a valuable asset. The second one is that messengers matter. So with the challenge around police and in public institutions, the lack of trust from the community really is dependent on who is delivering messages of solutions. So knowing what people are willing to adopt solutions coming out of community engagement initiatives really depends on who is telling them about them. So it's important to be strategic and thoughtful about which messengers to use, which is why we are in our survey evaluating which public figures are most trustworthy. And the third and final one is the ability to adapt and pivot quickly in the face of a crisis. What started out as a response to COVID-19 became a response to racial injustice and social injustice in the Brownsville community. And we know that this is something that peace-building organizations fundamentally have to be prepared to do in order to meet and continue building the trust that is so hard-earned. So thank you very much for your time and letting us share these lessons with you. And we wish you all a very enjoyable and peaceful Build Peace 2020 and beyond. Stay well and thank you.